Nitro School, for the last few years, we've always talked about how the cars work, how they make power, how they do things. We were talking about mixing some stuff up a little bit. Lake works for Total Seal, and you are, what are you? You're a trombone?
I'm a trobologist.
A trombone specialist?
Yes, exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah.
A lubrication specialist.
I'm a lubrication engineer.
So we started chit-chatting a little bit about what could we do that would be a little different for Nitro School. What we came up with is, why don't we do a comparison, apples to apples, Nitro engines versus Pro Stock engines?
They're both 500 cubic inches.
They are. Hey, you guys want to be on TV? Okay, wait a minute. Come on up here. We'll get it up here. We're going to get you on TV now. You got to help me out with it. We're going to do this a couple of times, okay? Because we didn't get to do this in Epping last week. They're shooting a TV show that's going to be the Epping event last week. So on a count of three, the first thing I need you guys to do is all yell, New England loves NHRA on Fox. And then we'll come back to Thunder Valley, okay? New England loves NHRA on Fox on 1, 2, 3. Okay, now so it doesn't look like the same shot. Everybody turn your shirt inside out. All right. Thunder Valley loves NHRA on Fox on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Now let's talk racing.
That take care of it for you?
Good.
Happy to be of service. Thank you guys for playing along. Appreciate that. All right, yes, top fuel engines, Pro Stock engines are both 500 cubic inches, so mechanically they're probably exactly the same, right? Same bore, same stroke, same.
Oops, no.
That's a top fuel piston.
Yep.
4.1875 bore.
4700-ish bore.
Oh yeah, a typical guy. Mine's bigger than yours is. 4.700 bore in a Pro Stock 500-inch engine, 4.187 in a top fuel engine. Now, obviously, the crankshaft is different. Okay, the crankshaft in a top fuel engine is 4.500, 4.5-inch stroke, small bore, large stroke. In a Pro Stock car.
Oh yeah, the complete opposite. Yeah, the big bore, short stroke, you still have to be 500 cubic inches.
Pro Stock crankshaft, depending on the bore, and they will, with top fuel bores, always the same. If you change a sleeve, it's the same. But the Pro Stock engines, they'll build them, they'll hold them, they'll adjust them, so they'll change the bore a thou here, a thou there. But for the most part, the stroke in a Pro Stock engine is about 3.600. All right? Now, everybody's got the old small block Chevy thing, right? 3.48. So think about that. A tenth of an inch more stroke, but it's 500 cubic inches because of the big bore. And the reason they do that is because of the fuel burn tendencies. Gasoline in a normally aspirated engine is going to burn very quickly from the time the spark fires until the time the fuel is used up. About 60 degrees of crankshaft rotation, give or take. All right, so if you're running 25 degrees of lead, you're getting the compression up when the piston comes over top dead center, but then you're only pushing down on the piston for about 35 or 40 degrees of actual crankshaft rotation. So the bigger bore gives you a stronger push for a short period of time. Nitro burns very slowly. That's why it's still burning coming out of the pipes, right? That's why you love the header flames at night. So if you use a small bore and a long stroke, once the fire starts, the crankshaft is being loaded for an entire 180-degree rotation cycle. So the longer bore, the more leverage makes more power. So small bore, long stroke, nitro, more power, big bore, short stroke. In a Pro Stock car, more power simply because of the fuel they burn. Now, one of the other things that's really different, and it's interesting because one of the things that we're talking about was the fact that technology has been bleeding over. Nitro cars run a lot of clearance on everything. They run very thick oil. They run a ton of oil pressure. If you have less than 150 or 180 pounds of oil pressure in a nitro car, you got a problem.
You're in trouble, yeah, big time. Well, one of the biggest things is the amount of fuel that these engines go through. So you think about like the SR18, which is the no-go fuel you run in a Pro Stock car. There's zero oxygen in the fuel. So in the naturally aspirated engine, you got to have oxygen in the fuel, the hydrocarbon, to make combustion. So that NA engine has to suck in all the oxygen to be able to make the burn happen. In a nitro car, nitromethane has its own oxygen.
Yes, sir.
So not only does it make more power, you actually have to put so much fuel in that engine to make it burn that it dilutes the oil, which is why the oils are so different.
You've got so much cylinder pressure, so much bearing load in a nitro car, you've got to have an awful thick oil in there to keep from squeezing it out. This is Mobil 1 Nitro Oil, thanks to the folks over there at Tony Stewart Racing, and it is...
I'm going to hold one for you. Here we go.
Oh, good, then I can pour it on your hand. So
Exactly.
It is pretty thick. Even if you've got a new car, like my new car takes like 16 weight or something like that. But as you can see,
this is straight 70.
that is pretty thick stuff.
Well, it's like honey. If you're in the kitchen cooking,
I'm just going to keep that whole thing.
That's like barbecue sauce, and that's honey.
Now,
versus Pro Stock oil.
I don't actually have any Pro Stock oil, but here's how thick Pro Stock oil is. 0.5 weight is what they run in most of those. Any of you guys build engines? Any of you guys ever put one together? What's your bearing clearance? What are you shooting for in bearing clearance? 3,000?
Yeah.
3,000? Yeah.
3 to 5.
3 to 5.
5. Holy smokes, you're going to need some of that 70 weight.
Exactly, yeah.
Bearing clearance in a Pro Stock car.
Probably about 1.8 to 2 thousandths.
Less than 2 thousandths is what they set up. The nitro cars on the main bearings, most of the guys will set them up about 5 thousandths, and the rod bearings, some of the guys are as big as 6 or 7. You want the main bearings tighter because that keeps the oil pressure feeding the connecting rod. It's got to go through there before it gets to the rod. And then the rods, remember the rods are aluminum in a top fuel car. They're going to grow. Everybody I spoke to says that if we start 5,000 clearance off, we leave the starting line, when it gets to the finish line, they figure it's about 8.5 or 9.
Yeah,
that's why they need really thick oil, and they need a lot of pressure to keep them going. Pro Stock engines, however, steel rods, they don't move nearly as much. You're running a 0 weight oil, so as long as you've got that constant pressure in there, you don't have a problem with the oil getting crushed out of the bearings.
Oh no, a perfect example. You think about Matt this year. So the first race of the year, he had a fresh engine in, out of Gainesville. That engine ran all the way through Chicago. Exact same engine. So it ran about 30 rounds of racing on the same engine where these guys can make it one pass and it comes apart.
That's not the same engine in the car this weekend, is it?
It's not the same engine now. New engine this weekend.
You need to go get that other one back. Were you here this morning?
I was, yes.
They actually changed the camshaft in it.
Yeah.
When's the last time you guys saw somebody tear a Pro Stock engine down at the racetrack, put it back together? But that's what they did in NASCAR. It had a lifter failure, which bruised the camshaft, didn't ruin it, but they figured this was going to be easier than swapping the motor, so that's what they did.
Absolutely. One thing about the oil thing, just to give you some exact numbers, we said, okay, one's like a 0 and one's a 70. In terms of like measuring it, so you can actually measure the flow rate of the oil. If you measure the flow rate of a nitro oil, it's what they call it Cinestoke. So let's think the higher the number, the thicker the oil is. A nitro engine is going to be, nitro engine oil is 350 centistokes at operating temperature. In NHRA Pro Stock, what Matt ran last night was 13 centistokes.
What is a centistroke?
Say thousandths of a stoke, so it's a thousandth of a second. So they measure the flow rate, right?
Right.
So they're looking at the oil, they're moving it through a calculator from point A to point B. How long does it take for it to go to here to there? So the higher the number, the thicker the oil, but that's the whole reason that you have that much power, right? You have 10,000 plus horsepower versus 1,400 horsepower. Think about what happens to that crankshaft with all that cylinder pressure. It's not just doing this, it's doing this. That's why you have to have so much bearing clearance, because the crankshaft's doing this. So you have to have thick enough oil to make sure it doesn't fall apart.
A nitro engine, when it's running happy, still has 1,500 pounds of cylinder pressure at bottom dead center.
Bottom dead center.
Bottom dead center. The job you do not want to have is being an exhaust rocker arm or exhaust push rod in a nitro motor.
Oh, you know what?
If you've ever walked into a pressurized building, right, where you got to lean on the door to get the thing open, they're trying to open that valve into 1,500 pounds of cylinder pressure.
And that's a great comparison point, too, because on that Pro Stock car down there, when they changed that camshaft this morning, those lifters, that's a single roller lifter on the exhaust. All these guys over there have double rollers on that exhaust lifter because there's so much pressure on it that they have to have that double roller to handle the pressure.
Well, since we got into camshafts and lifters, let's talk a little camshafts and lifters.
Sure.
How much lift in a Pro Stock car? How much valve lift?
It's over an inch. It's ridiculous, right?
Come on.
I don't know the exact number. They don't tell you those kind of things, right?
I lived in the Pro Stock world for a while. Interesting fact, those of you who've been around a while, do you remember when they went to the 10,500 RPM rev limit? Some of the guys were running close to 12,000 RPMs, and NHRA instituted, with input from most of the racers, 10,500 RPM rev limit, because what they're going to do is we are going to save you $500,000 a year in valve springs. When you're spinning the thing 12,000 RPM, you're crushing the valve springs every time. At the time, most of the guys were running right at an inch lift. The stuff I was working on, we were about 1060, 1080, and spinning 12,000 RPM. So now you're only allowed to spend 10,500 RPMs. What could you possibly do to get the power back if you can only go 10,500 RPMs? Now that you know your springs will hold up,
Lift that valve more.
increase the lift. So they're still changing the valve springs. It's just now they're opening the valves about an inch 120. Think about that. The next time, I mean, when I was a kid, right, somebody's like, I got a 695 cam. I'm like, holy smokes. And these guys are running almost double that. They're running them 10,500 RPM. Pro stock car also has got 9 cam bearings. One in between every 2 loads to keep the cam from flexing. The nitro cars don't do that. They'd love to, but they're not allowed. There was a moratorium a few years ago on the blocks, the heads, all of the hard parts, for the simple reason to keep the big money teams from spending everybody else out of the sport. If you tell everybody, look, you're all stuck with the same parts, then the trickle-down effect is there so the smaller teams can buy used parts and keep going. But the camshaft technology in pro stock went, when most of the stuff in fuel pretty much flatlined. And of course, when you got 60 pounds of boost in the manifold, that don't hurt either. Now, when you've got all that cylinder pressure, you got to have a pretty robust ring to keep it in there. That is a nitro ring. It's a typical 16-inch. It is a hard steel. And with nitro stuff, I mean, 16, 16, 3/16, that's been the ring package in the history of the world, right? Do you know what the number one highest friction part of an internal combustion engine is?
I know. Anybody else? Piston ring against the cylinder wall. Number 1 source of friction. About 40% of all engine friction is this thing rubbing against the cylinder wall.
So if you want to decrease the friction, simple thing to do,
make the ring thinner.
Make the ring thinner. As long as you've still got, I don't know how well you can see the thin one in particular. The typical pro stock ring right now, 0.6 millimeter. 0.6 millimeter. But as long as it'll keep the cylinder sealed, and that comes with a side benefit. Because the frequency with which you have to go in, rehome, rebuild, and change the rings, if you don't have near as much friction, they last so much longer.
Oh, absolutely. You think about it, so 6 races, he ran that same engine, it was still holding back him at the last race. So the specific numbers, so that 16th ring, that's 0.62 inches. This is 0.24. Now, this is some fun here, right? So we got the Bristol Motor Speedway in our backyard over there.
How many of you guys went over there for the dirt race? Anybody? I was. It's kind of cool. Anyway, I'm sorry. I digress. I love NASCAR.
It's all good. Yeah, that's obviously my background, right? My dad. So 20 years ago, we would have been running over there in NASCAR.
That's what, your dad raced NASCAR?
My dad raced NASCAR.
What was his name?
Lake Speed.
Oh, yeah. And you're Lake Speed Junior. Okay, talk them together for me now.
Yeah, it's all,
I think I got it.
Arizona State.
I'm U of A. You can make all the Arizona State fun you want as soon as Bobby Buddy comes out of his trailer, because that's where he's going still.
So if you think about it, 20 years ago, over there at the half-mile track, those guys would have been running an 0.43, 0.43 3-millimeter ring today. And that ring back then was a ductile moly ring. So that's a ductile iron ring with a moly face. That engine would have lasted 500 miles, and you have to tear it down, rehone it, and then run it again. Today, they're running this same 0.6 millimeter top ring. So a 0.6, 2-millimeter ring package. So we actually had one of my dad's old engines we found on the floor. We put it in the dyno, actually found the dyno shit. 20 years ago, that engine, Ford C3, made 733 horsepower. We put it in the dyno, made 733 horsepower after sitting for 20 years.
Okay.
We took it apart. All we did was change the pistons, the rings, and the hum. We went from the old school, full round style piston to the side relief style piston like this.
Don't spill that oil on Hannah's desk, or you'll be in big trouble. That's his oil, it's not mine. His oil.
You brought it.
His oil.
I'm the oil guy, but you brought it.
You check the fingerprints of the last touchdown. It's his oil.
So anyway, we went from changed that piston style, went from that 0.43, 3-millimeter ring package to a 0.7. I mean, that's thicker than this. 0.7, 0.72 millimeter. Took the block over to Greg Anderson. Greg honed it. This this is how it was home. This is the old school single grit 400 finish. Then Greg finished it with a 170 grit diamond that came across the top of it with a 600 grit CBN to create this modern plateau finish, very similar to what they would run in a pro stock car today. All we changed was the piston, the ring, and the hone. Anyone want to guess how much power we picked up?
No. Same compression ratio?
Same compression ratio, same cam, same head, same manifold, cranks, rods, every other part of the engine is the exact same. It went from 733, 773, 40, 40.
Just for a thinner piston ring and a better cylinder on.
Absolutely.
That gentleman had a question.
That's a great question. All right, so why have three? Why don't you just put one? It's even less friction. But this is a great question. So the job of the ring package is actually twofold. It's not just compression sealing, it's also controlling the oil. Because oil has a lower octane value than your fuel. So you have to be able to control the oil to keep oil out of the combustion chamber. The top ring, the only thing it does is seal compression. The second ring is 80% oil control. And then the oil ring is just oil control. Because you got to get the oil back through it. These little holes in the side of that piston are greenback holes. So you could put one piston ring in. It would reduce friction, but your engine would run way worse because you don't have proper oil control. The only reason the motorcycle guys run a 2-ring setup is because of weight. Because they're running 15,000, 16,000 RPMs. The best possible ring seal overall is a 3-ring setup. 2 compression rings, 1 oil ring.
You've got to have plenty of oil between the piston skirt and the wall to keep this thing moving freely and to keep it cool. The oil is what keeps the piston cool. In NASCAR engines and in long duration engines, they actually have squirters that shoot oil into the bottom of the piston to keep it cool. You've got to have the bottom of the piston drenched in oil. But you can't. Factory stock cylinder cars, they're loud, but you got to get that oil back down off the wall so it doesn't get in the combustion chamber. What the little grooves do in the hone is they leave just enough oil to lubricate that top ring, because if it was running dry, it would run about 3 minutes.
Absolutely, and that's one of the big changes, is that people might be wondering, okay, well, that thin ring, I mean, it can't last very long. Well, the big difference between those old NASCAR rings and the old school rings that were iron, this is steel. It's a better material. So, that back to the NASCAR deal. 20 years ago, they won one race with that Ducko Moly ring, had to rehome the engine, but it would be down like 5 to 8 horsepower to one race. Today, they run 1,500 race miles, and they're down nothing on power.
And I legitimately don't know this. How far do like the Elmore engines they run in the trucks go? Because those things will run 4, 5, 6 races, right? They don't run races as long as the Cup, but I know those guys will put an engine in and just leave it for a while.
Oh, they'll run up to 2,500 race miles.
Wow.
And that's with a 1.2 millimeter steel top ring. But the thing about this ring is, so the steel material makes it better. It can handle all the abuse. It's not going to break. It's better for your engine. It reduces friction, increases horsepower, reduces cylinder bore wear. But the big thing is, these rings are coated. Not with moly, which is soft and can break off and wear out quickly. This is titanium nitride. If you got a gold drill bit or gold insert at home that works so good, the reason why it works so good, that gold coating, is titanium nitride. The hardness of titanium nitride is 3 times harder than moly, which is why the ring will live 3 times longer. But guess what? There's no porosity. It can't hold any oil, which is why the hose has to change. Those big deep valleys are what hold the oil to lubricate and to seal that piston ring. It all has to work together. And if you look at one of these nitro engines, the sleeves from Darton those valleys are about twice as deep as we showed right here.
Well, they have to be, one, because they've got thicker oil that they're dealing with, you got to be able to leave it there, and two, because they run so much extra clearance. Now, the technology with ring seal in the cup world and the pro stock world, and you can't tell anybody this, but they work with some really exotic engines that run in places like Monaco, but they're not allowed to mention the names of any of them. That technology has now started making its way into the nitro cars because you've learned things that can help them not only seal the cylinders, but help keep that oil under control as well.
Absolutely. The materials, the coatings, how you hone it, all of that is migrated, like you said, from those cars that don't have fenders on them with wings to other cars that have fenders and wings, you know.
Anybody have any questions? Anything nitro related, anything pro stock related, we'll help you out if we can.
Right behind you is one question.
Yes?
When will we see a flat crank?
When will we see a flat crank?
Oh, well, obviously it's in some production engines and other stuff. The trick to the flat crank is, in some series, is outlawed, right? So where it's allowed is pretty good. The trick is you got to have everything balanced so perfectly. So it's an advantage, but it comes across with more details you got to manage.
I don't think you'll ever see one in the nitro ranks. One of the things that the nitro cars do, because the crankshaft is under pressure from the piston stroke for the entire 180 degrees, by the time this piston gets to the bottom, you've got another one that's halfway down, another one that's coming over the top, so they are under constant load, and it would be tough to do that if you had a flat crank. If you've got a pro stock car where they're going bang, 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 you can change the pulses up a little bit.
You could, and maybe realize something. We work with some motorcycle teams that do endurance racing stuff too. And one of the reasons why they've gone away from flat plane cranks is because of the firing order. It hits the tire too hard and breaks traction. So by having a 90-degree offset, it's smaller pulses. It's not a bang. So from a traction standpoint, I don't think the pro stock guys will ever do it because it would be too hard on the gear changes. You'd probably have more tire slippage, which they don't like that.
And probably more breakage. They don't like much of that either.
No, they're already hard enough on stuff already.
Good question, though. Anybody else have any questions about that? Come on, you're halfway there.
It ain't necessarily that, but when they stage as far as wreck the car, they do their burnout.
Sure.
Why are there not flames out there? Why? What? I know you got a problem.
Why do you not see flames until they hit the gas wide open?
Well, is it the throttle stop stopping it from flaming?
That's a big part of it, yeah. The throttle stop, well, they're only opening the butterflies about 1/8 of an inch. And that means they're only opening the barrel valve about 1/8 of an inch. So it's a fuel volume thing. You can actually tune one, and the guys, if you've ever been to a cackle show, they do it all the time. You can tune one, and you can do it with cam timing and ignition timing so that they'll sit there and spit flames out when they're idling, and it looks really cool. But when they're idling, they're trying to keep the engine cool, and they do that with fuel. So they're pouring enough fuel in to keep the engine cool, but there's not enough that it's still flaming coming out of the pipes. When they go to full fuel volume, and I mentioned it last night during the qualifying section, I think it's fascinating, right? Every time somebody drives a car, they go, oh man, this thing only gets 18 miles a gallon. Mileage on this thing sucks. A nitro car, forget the burnout, forget backing up, forget idling, forget all of that. From the time they stage it, when they hit the gas, till the time it goes 330 feet, which is that first orange block, it's burned 2 gallons of fuel. 2 gallons of fuel to go from one goalpost to the other on a football field.
And it puts over a gallon of nitro in the oil in one pass.
Yeah, if you ever watch them after they warm one of these things up and drain the oil, it looks like 30 weight because it's so diluted from the fuel that gets down there. But they pour all the extra fuel in there to keep the thing cool. Beware, pro stock tuck coming through. Pro stock tuck coming through. Hey, old man's rotor's running pretty good.
Yeah, we've done some oil analysis with some of the nitro guys, and you're about 8 to 10% nitro in the oil after one pass. You put that much in.
It's interesting. I still talk to Austin Coyle on a pretty regular basis, especially because he follows along on NHRA.TV, and if I say something wrong, my phone goes, and he goes, you're a moron, Reinhart. But he told me that a few years back when he was still in the game, you guys started doing some research, and it changed their oil package because you were being able to keep some of that fuel out of the oil. It didn't lose as much viscosity going down the racetrack because of the better ring seal.
Absolutely. So you get better ring seal. One of the advantages of that is you get less blow by. That's better ring seals, less blow by. That means less contamination of the oil which now lets them change things for bearing clearances and other things that help improve the windage and performance of the engine. You would think that they make so much power that they don't ever need to make more power, but the reality is the more consistent and reliable the engine is, the easier it is to tune.
You can never have too much horsepower, money, or ammunition. Did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had a question. Anybody else have any questions? Well, I think it's time for you to get back to work. I think it's time for me to get back to work.
Sounds good, sir.
Yes. Gotcha. Let me just have that. Hey, race fans, if you are a Tony Schumacher fan, I'm sure most of you know by now, his name has already been added up there to the Legends of Thunder Valley at noon right over here. He's going to be doing a special autograph session, and they have these limited edition Legend of Thunder Valley hero cards. Get them while they're hot. It's at noon, like 5 minutes from now, right there. If you're a fan of the Sarge, be a good time to grab one of these before you start having to try to search on eBay because they don't have them out there anymore.
Very good.
Winning strider top fuel history.
The Richard Petty of drag racing?
No, that's Force.
Okay.
Well, thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed Nitro School. I know it's a little different from what we usually do, but I hope you learned something. I hope you found something interesting. If you have any questions or comments you want to shoot to me, I am an announcer at NHRA.com. And if you've got any kind of a project that needs a piston ring, of course, we're talking race engines here, but street engines, pumps, compressors, if it needs a piston ring, you guys make a piston ring for it.
Absolutely. So give us a call. You can go to our website, totalsteel.com. If you even remotely enjoyed this, you should check out our podcast, Hidden Horsepower. You can search for it on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, all that. Hidden Horsepower, pretty cool stuff.
They make piston rings so small you cannot put one on your little finger, and they make piston rings so big I can slide one over my head. Steve Gibbs, how are you, sir? Speaking of Legends of Nitro, nice to see you. How's everything in your world? Living legend.
Right, exactly.
And still involved. Once you get nitro in your blood, you just can't quit. Folks, thank you for coming out. Really appreciate you being here today.